Imagine a single scar hidden beneath a pressed white blouse, carrying the weight of a truth the world tried to bury. 15 years ago, Captain Mera Dawson walked away from a war zone, her chest marked by a mistake no one would name. At a memorial meant to honor heroes, a cadet's cruel whisper and a general's raw confession cracked that silence wide open, pulling Mera back into a fight she never chose. This is not just a story of survival, it's a journey of a woman who stood up again and again to demand that her pain and the pain of those forgotten be seen. Will you walk with her through the fire to uncover what it means to reclaim dignity from the ashes of denial? Let's step into her story together. She wasn't listed as combat wounded. That's what they told her right after someone noticed the scar peeking out beneath her white blouse. A cadet had laughed, called it a botched cosmetic job, like she was just another woman with a vanity project gone wrong. She didn't speak. She simply rose to her feet, quietly with grace, but the kind of grace that bore the weight of 15 years. Then it happened. A voice, graveled, aging, and unmistakably authoritative, cut through the polished air of the ceremony. A voice that didn't belong to whispers or embarrassment. It belonged to command. "I shot her," the voice declared. Every sound in the space stopped. Every eye turned. Every thought froze. "Syria, 2008, friendly fire," the retired general continued from the stage. "That scar on her chest, it's haunted me every day since." And in that instant, everything shifted. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. No return address, no stamp. Just an envelope slipped between a phone bill and a local grocery coupon. The handwriting was sharp, clean, unmistakably military, tilted at a precise angle, as if the sender still obeyed protocol and penmanship. Inside was a single sheet of white stationery, one sentence written in bold, unwavering ink. "We both know the scar wasn't your fault. It's time." Captain Mera Dawson sat at her kitchen table, staring at the sentence for minutes that felt like a reckoning. The coffee beside her, black, cooling, untouched, had been forgotten. Her fingers hovered over the letters as if they might unlock something. Context, identity, purpose. She read it again, then again. It had been 15 years. 15 years since the blast, since the silence that followed. Since she was sent home with a discharge, a handshake, and a quiet request to disappear. No ceremony, no recognition, just a scar no one wanted to name, and a story that didn't make the official reports. She hadn't worn a uniform since, hadn't stepped onto a military base, hadn't spoken to a single person from those years. She folded the paper, slid it back into the envelope. Her breath caught. There was no signature, but she had a name in mind. The following morning, another envelope appeared in the mail. This one was official, heavy with embossed gold letters on rich cardstock. "Valor Beyond Borders, Annual Memorial for Fallen Aviators." She stared at it like it might combust in her hands. She didn't belong there. Not after what happened. Not next to heroes memorialized in bronze. And yet, the letter wouldn't let her go. Neither would that first message. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe both. Sunday arrived too soon. The Uber pulled up to the Arlington Air Force Memorial just as the sun stretched across the horizon. The light slid slowly over the stone arc, over the polished lawn, over the white folding chairs lined with military precision. Flags snapped in the breeze. The morning air smelled faintly of brass, damp grass, and ceremony. She stepped out in a tailored navy skirt and a white blouse. No medals, no ribbons, just the crisp fabric of a woman who had learned to live in silence. Her blonde hair, shoulder length, was brushed and tucked neatly behind one ear. Her eyes, storm blue, heavy with memory, swept over the grounds as she clutched a small purse. The ushers checked the list, nodded, directed her to the honorary section, first row, third seat from the aisle. She walked past the glances. No one recognized her. That was fine. 10 minutes before the ceremony began, the man beside her mumbled something about his glasses. She turned. An elderly veteran, white-haired and dressed in a tan jacket stitched with faded pilot wings, probably from the Second World War. His hands fumbled at the frame on his nose. Without hesitation, Mera knelt beside him. "Here, let me help you with those, sir." He smiled, frail, grateful. As she adjusted his glasses, a breeze lifted the edge of her blouse. The top button had come undone, and there it was, a pale scar, sharp and clean, beginning just at her collarbone. The comment came like a slap. "Looks like a botched right boob job," someone muttered nearby. Cadets by their dress, shiny shoes, sharp creases, arrogance. Laughter followed, quiet, but not quiet enough. Mera stood, refastened the button. She didn't look at them, didn't speak. But others had noticed. Eyes were drifting now, whispers rising. 15 minutes in, a man in a blue suit approached, clipboard in hand. Polite smile, apologetic tone. "Captain Dawson," he began. "I'm very sorry, but it seems there's a discrepancy in your record. There's no indication of a combat-related injury. These seats are strictly for decorated wounded veterans. I'd be happy to escort you to an alternate seat just behind." Decorated, wounded, as if pain only counted when adorned in silver and bronze. She blinked, didn't protest. She stood. But before she could step away, the old man beside her rose too. "If she doesn't sit here," he said, his voice brittle but unwavering, "then I don't either." Mera turned, startled. His hand shook, but his spine was straight as ever. The usher hesitated. "Sir, we'll handle this quickly." "No," Ellis Monroe said. "No more sorting. That woman's got a scar bigger than the one I got in Okinawa. Don't you dare move her." Heads turned, phones lifted, and then the voice came, again, from the stage, microphone still in hand. "General Randall Kane." "She stays where she is." Silence. Mera froze, her eyes met his. "I shot her," Kane said, his voice hoarse and deliberate. "Syria, 2008. Friendly fire. My command. My decision. It won't be in any record. It was classified. But that scar, the one you dismissed, haunts me every single day." And just like that, the ceremony transformed. There was no recovery from the truth. No pre-written line on the teleprompter could bridge that moment. Kane's voice lingered, hanging in the warm morning air like a bullet suspended in time. The microphone in his hand trembled. The crowd hushed, not in respect, but in disbelief. Mera didn't move. She could feel her own breath louder than any other sound. She could have sat down, could have walked out, but something deeper held her there. Maybe it was the break in Kane's voice when he said haunts. Or maybe it was Ellis Monroe's hand, still resting gently on her elbow, steady as the granite beneath their feet. Then, a single clap from somewhere in the crowd. Slow, clear, unapologetic. Another joined in. Then another. Until applause rippled like thunder, rising with the force of 15 years of silence, finally breaking. Not for the general, not yet, but for the moment itself, for the raw, fragile moment when truth finally forced its way through the layers of protocol that had tried for years to silence it. General Randall Kane had stepped fully down from the memorial stage, and Mera watched him come toward her, the man whose name had once been no more than a line in her heavily redacted debriefing report. A phantom, a signature underlined in grief and bureaucracy. Now he walked toward her real, uniformed, yet unmistakably human. "May I?" he asked, voice low, almost tentative. Mera glanced at the seat beside hers, the one an usher had tried and failed to remove her from. She gave a single nod. He sat, and for the first time in 15 long years, their lives aligned, their eyes met. "It was a drone strike," he said, quiet, just for her ears. "You were marked hostile. Intel failed. I failed." Mera didn't answer right away. Her face, pale under the growing flush of heat, revealed nothing. "I remember the heat," she said finally. "The sound before it hit. A low hum. Then nothing. Then fire." Kane lowered his head. "We tried to pull mission logs, but it was buried, deep black. I filed 3 reports. All were redacted. All disappeared. You disappeared. I assumed you hadn't made it." Her throat tightened. "I didn't," she said. "Not for 3 minutes. Then someone found me. Pulled me out. I never saw his face." Kane's head jerked up. His eyes sharpened with something unreadable. "He carried me," Mera continued. Across almost 2 clicks of broken rock and ash, I woke up in a field unit in Jordan. They patched me up. Then they told me to forget. He nodded, slow, understanding. They do that, he said quietly, when the cost of a mistake is too high. There was a pause. Then Kane reached into his jacket. Mera tensed, but he didn't pull a weapon or some official form. Instead, he brought out a small notebook, leather-bound, frayed at the corners, worn down like something handled too many times. He opened it to a bookmark page. I write your initials here every year, he said. October 19th, the day I pulled the trigger. Just one line. He showed her, MD Syria, friendly, scar. Mera's lips parted, but no sound came. Her breath caught in her chest. Kane shut the book with quiet reverence. His gaze swept over the murmuring crowd, who were only just beginning to reorient as the ceremony awkwardly tried to resume. I can't give you a medal, he said. I can't change what's in the record. But this seat, you deserve it. You earned it the moment you stood back up. I never fell, Mera said, her voice firm, even. That made him smile. Small, real. Behind them, Cadet Josh Keller stood stiff behind his camera tripod. The live stream was still running, and its comment feed had erupted. Hashtags were trending. Care Enough to Confess lit up the side of the screen. He lowered the camera, face flushed with guilt. He hadn't meant to film something like that, but a cadet beside him whispered, Dude, you got that on tape? He had. He'd captured the moment Mera rose, the collective gasp of the crowd, and the general's confession. It would go viral by nightfall. Every veteran network from East Coast to West would see it. The memorial continued, though the script had been shattered beyond repair. The MC returned to the mic, hands trembling slightly, voice cracking as he tried to shift to the next reading. Mera didn't hear any of it. Her body remained still, eyes fixed forward, jaw set. But her thoughts tunneled away, back to Syria, to the mission no one had spoken of for over a decade, to the hilltop where the sky opened like a wound and swallowed her whole. She remembered dragging herself through fire, the skin on her chest blistering in the heat. The angle of her world tipped sideways. Sounds distant, her team gone. The scar had formed in the weeks after, deep, ridged, painful, etched into her like a brand. But no one had acknowledged it, not once, not until today, not until this morning, after the final name was read aloud and taps played over the loudspeakers. The crowd had risen, so did Mera. She turned to leave quietly when a woman in dress uniform intercepted her, calm, official. Captain Dawson, this woman said. Colonel Jeanette Long, Public Affairs. Would you come with me for a moment? The Secretary of the Air Force would like a word. Mera blinked. She followed Long behind the stage, past rows of white tents and a line of security staff. Inside one of the tents stood a tall woman in a gray suit, flanked by aides. She turned as Mera entered. Captain Dawson, I'm Secretary Hayes. Thank you for attending. Mera gave a polite nod, cautious. Please sit. Hayes gestured to a chair. I'll be brief. Hayes folded her hands. You made an impression today, not just on the audience, on all of us. I didn't do anything, Mera said. You existed, Hayes replied. That was enough. Truth has gravity, Captain. It moves things. Mera arched a brow. We can't rewrite what was erased, Hayes said, but we can bring it back to light, and we'd like your help. Doing what? Helping us reach others, veterans like you, the ones who were overlooked, silenced, left behind. Mera looked at her own hands. The scar beneath her blouse pulsed, not from pain, but from something else, something more vital. I'm not a hero, she said. No, Hayes agreed. You're rarer. You're evidence. Outside, the crowd had mostly thinned, but a small cluster remained. Young airmen, cadets, a few retirees. One of them, a girl in ROC fatigues, stepped forward, nervous, tentative. Captain Dawson? Mera turned. My mom served, the cadet said. She had a scar like yours, never told us what happened. They said it wasn't worth a medal. Mera looked at the girl, met her eyes. It was, she said. The cadet smiled, and something shifted inside Mera. Not the scar, the silence. It was finally breaking, and she wasn't the only one carrying it anymore. 3 days after the ceremony, Mera Dawson sat alone in her apartment. The television was muted. Footage from Sunday's memorial flickered across the screen on repeat. Every major network had picked it up. Kane's confession, Mera's scar, the stunned silence that had swept the crowd. They'd turned her trauma into a headline. She wasn't sure how to feel about it. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. There had been hundreds since Sunday. Messages from veterans, from strangers, from cadets who had once laughed at her. Some apologized. Others shared their own scars. Some just said thank you. Mera didn't respond to most, not because she didn't care, but because she couldn't yet find the words that wouldn't break her wide open. 15 years of silence had made her fragile to speech. Words felt too sharp. The doorbell rang. She moved cautiously, pulse quickening. At the door stood a courier, holding a small, flat parcel. No return address, just a single classification stamp. She signed for it, closed the door behind her, and set the box on the table. Inside, beneath the wrapping, was a manila envelope. No note, just a single dog tag on a worn chain. Scuffed, dented. Her name. Her breath hitched. It was the tag she'd lost the day of the strike. On the back, someone had scratched something into the metal. Still standing. RC. She closed her eyes, swallowed hard. Later that night, Mera sat in front of her laptop. She opened the livestream archive, not the edited clip everyone had seen, but the raw 2-hour feed logged by the ceremony organizers. She scrubbed forward, to the moment the usher approached her, to her own rising, to Ellis Monroe's words, to Kane stepping down from the stage. Her face didn't shift much. But everything had changed. Her fingers clenched so tightly around the armrest that her knuckles had gone pale, bloodless. She paused the video, rewound it, played it again. The familiar moment unfolded, the confession, the collective gasp, but this time her eyes caught something new. In the crowd behind her, a man in plain clothes stood up precisely as General Kane spoke the words. He didn't applaud, didn't raise a phone, just stood motionless, watching her with an unnerving stillness, eyes obscured by dark sunglasses. Then wordlessly he turned and walked away. She paused the video again, zoomed in. The frame was grainy, but the details chilled her anyway. Beard, sunglasses, baseball cap pulled low, no insignia. Still, something about the man's stance, the way he carried himself, sent an unmistakable chill crawling down her spine. She couldn't explain why, but in the pit of her stomach she knew. He hadn't come to mourn. The next day, Mera Dawson left her house for a walk. The Arlington neighborhood was quiet, almost too quiet, lined with aging brick townhomes and towering oaks whose branches cast dappled shadows across the sidewalk. She kept mostly to herself, as she always had, offering the occasional nod to a jogger or dog walker passing by. That morning, she'd thrown on her old USAF sweatshirt without thinking. The emblem had faded nearly to nothing, a faint echo of a time she'd tried to leave behind. It wasn't a message. She just hadn't gotten around to doing laundry. Then a voice called from across the street. "Hey, Captain Dawson!" She turned. A teenage boy straddled his bicycle, helmet askew, grinning awkwardly. "Saw you on the news. My uncle served in Fallujah. Said what you did. That took guts." Mera managed a small, polite smile. "Tell him thank you for his service." "He already knows," the boy replied with a shrug, "but I'll tell him anyway." With that, he pedaled off, wheels kicking up dry leaves in his wake. She stood there for a long, still moment before she resumed her walk. That short exchange grounded her in a way that hours of interviews, speeches, or ceremonies hadn't. It felt honest, unscripted, real. Later that afternoon, she stepped into a small bookstore tucked between a pawn shop and a locksmith. It was the kind of place that smelled like old pages, worn leather, and stories someone had once lived. She drifted toward the military memoir section, fingers brushing familiar titles. Then a voice she hadn't expected to hear again broke the quiet. "Didn't think I'd find you here." She turned. Randall Kane stood just beyond the stack, dressed down in a blazer and jeans, looking uncomfortable and out of place amid the shelves and dust. His expression was part sheepish, part resolute. "How did you—" she started. He gave her a faint smile. "Called in a favor? You left a breadcrumb trail when you ordered that old dog-eared copy of Ghosts of Kandahar. She raised an eyebrow. I owe you lunch, he added. You owe me a hell of a lot more than that. Fair, he said, not defensive. But lunch is a start. They walked together down the block, stopping at a quiet cafe where no one recognized either of them, which frankly was a relief. They chose a table by the window. Once their food arrived, Mera didn't hesitate. You weren't supposed to say anything. I know. So why did you? Kane stared into his coffee for a long moment before answering. Because it's been eating me alive. Every damn time I gave a speech, handed out a medal, I thought of you. Of what I buried. What we buried. Just to keep the system running. Mira stirred her tea slowly, letting silence hang between them. What happens now, she asked. DC's making noise. They want hearings, reviews, names, dates, and you. Kane met her eyes with something like resignation. I want peace for you, for me, maybe even for all the ghosts that won't stop screaming. She looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. That evening when Mira returned home, she found a letter taped to her front door. No envelope, no stamp, just her name written in stark black ink across the front. She opened it inside. The message was printed, not handwritten. You were supposed to disappear. Stay quiet. Some of us risked everything to make that happen. Stay down, or we'll remind you why silence was safer. No signature. No hint at who had written it. Mira read it twice. Then she folded it neatly, walked over to the drawer where she kept her old dog tag, and locked it away beside it. Then she opened her laptop and began to type. Not a memoir, a report, a document addressed directly to the Secretary of the Air Force. One packed with names, coordinates, deployment times, intel sources, and details that only someone like her could know. It was the full truth, and for once, she wasn't going to keep it buried. She didn't stop for sleep, barely paused for food. For 2 straight days, she wrote. When it was done, the report stretched 43 pages, excluding 6 annexes. The memories came flooding back with a clarity that hurt. The classified briefings, the falsified intel supplied by a private contractor, the last-minute change in coordinates just before deployment. She remembered the voice on the comms that had pushed them forward. The eerie quiet before the sky cracked open, the searing pain, the smell of burning metal, the sudden cold. She included photos, grainy and old, but marked by her hand, maps she'd preserved, notes she'd scribbled years ago in the margins of a journal she once tried to forget. Nothing was redacted, no name spared. At the end, she signed it. Then she encrypted the file, copied it onto 2 secure drives, and hand-delivered one to the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. The man who accepted the envelope wore a crisp suit and a sterile face. He didn't offer thanks, didn't even look curious. He nodded once and said, "You'll be contacted." Mira left the building with a strange sense of calm. Not relief, not triumph, just clarity. The kind that comes after too long breathing stale, recycled air, and finally stepping outside. That night, the doorbell rang. She hesitated, checked the peephole. Randall. When she opened the door, he didn't waste time. You sent it, didn't you? She nodded. They're going to fight it. I'm counting on it. He studied her for a moment, something like admiration or fear flickering in his eyes. You should come to the press forum tomorrow. Secretary Hayes is making a statement. Might help to be seen. Mira was quiet for a beat, then replied, I'm not a symbol. You already are, he said. You're their president now. The press forum was held in a white canvas pavilion on Joint Base Andrews. Inside, the air was thick with journalists, cameras flashing, voices rising. Military officials stood in crisp uniforms, saying much and meaning little. Secretary Hayes took the stage, flanked by 2 generals. Behind the curtain, Mira waited, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that felt just a bit too tight in the shoulders. Hayes began with formalities, acknowledgments, thanks, then pivoted. Recent events, she said, her voice steady, have brought to light incidents that were never meant to remain hidden. We owe our veterans not just remembrance, but recognition. As of today, we have launched a formal review of injuries previously classified as non-combat. A journalist's hand shot up. Is this connected to Captain Mera Dawson's case? Hayes didn't flinch. It's inspired by it, but this is bigger than one individual. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Later in the hallway outside the press area, Mera stood beside Secretary Hayes. You're going to be a target, Hayes said quietly. Politically, institutionally, maybe worse. I already am. We'll assign protection. Quiet, constant. And we've reopened your clearance. If you're willing, we want you advising on oversight reform. Mera nodded slowly. You'll get my terms, in writing. We expected nothing less. They shook hands. That evening, Mera returned home. Another envelope had been slipped under her door. No name, no return address. Inside, a photo, blurry, clearly zoomed in. It showed her entering the OSI building 2 days earlier. On the back, written in thick black marker, "Stop digging, we're not ghosts." She burned the photo in her kitchen sink. Then she picked up her phone and called Hayes. The threats are escalating, he said. We're tracking it, Hayes replied, but we may need you to disappear for a while. Go dark until we've locked this down. Mera's voice was calm, unshaken. No, she said, I won't hide. Then don't be alone. Keep your phone on. Mera didn't sleep that night. Every creak in the floorboards outside her bedroom door felt too intentional. Every car that rolled by outside the window moved too slowly, lingering like a threat. She sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, her service pistol resting on the countertop beside her, next to her dog tag, both of them cold, solid reminders of who she was and what she'd been through. She repeated the words to herself like a quiet prayer, still standing. 2 days later, she arrived at the Pentagon, stepping through the cold gray corridors to attend a closed-door session with the Air Force Ethics Review Board. The meeting room was colder than necessary, as if the chill had seeped into the walls over years of silence and compromise. 5 uniformed officers sat across the table. At the far end sat one civilian observer, a woman from the Department of Justice. She said nothing, just watched. For the next 3 hours, they fired questions, some pointed, some fair, others laced with quiet accusation. Why didn't you come forward earlier? Because I was instructed not to. By whom? Refer to the report. You already have the names. Do you have any proof that those instructions were given? They came through encrypted communications. The system auto-purges, but the timestamps align with the moment of the strike. And you expect us to act on fragmented information? I expect you to act like officers. That shut the room down. Not a single rebuttal. No one met her eyes. When they broke for lunch, no one officially dismissed her. So Mera stayed where she was, alone, unmoved. She wasn't sure if anything had shifted in her favor. She didn't even know if she'd earned their respect, but she hadn't backed down. Outside in the hallway, General Randall Kane was waiting. They're split, he told her quietly. Half of them want to bury this again. The others, they're just waiting to see who flinches first. Then I won't, he nodded once. I've got your 6. She allowed herself the barest hint of a smile. An hour later, they reconvened. This time, the DOJ observer finally spoke. Captain Dawson, she said, her voice calm but unwavering, under federal oversight protocols, we are prepared to escalate your testimony to a joint military-to-civilian inquiry. This escalation would grant subpoena authority. Are you prepared to cooperate fully with that process? Yes, Mera replied, including testifying under oath before Congress, if necessary. Especially then. The lead officer cleared his throat. We will conduct further review of your report. Expect a determination within the week. I'll be waiting. Mera Dawson stood and walked out. For the first time since the ceremony, she allowed herself to breathe. The air outside felt a little less heavy, cleaner. She still had a long road ahead, but she wasn't alone anymore. The congressional hearing wasn't supposed to happen for weeks. The timeline had originally been generous. Testimonies, confidential briefings, layers of background checks. But the pressure mounted fast. Veteran groups began mobilizing. Media coverage intensified. A viral campaign under the hashtag #KarenChurchChess stormed across platforms. In 5 days, a special committee was assembled. By day 6, Mera was summoned to testify. She didn't bring a lawyer. She didn't request a speechwriter. Her truth didn't need scripting. Her words had already been etched deep into her bones. The hearing chamber on Capitol Hill loomed like a cathedral of judgment. High ceilings, cold fluorescent lights, and walls lined with unmoving cameras. Rows of aides, press members, lawmakers, and curious spectators filled every seat. Some were there to see her vindicated. Others were there hoping she'd crack. Mera sat in the witness chair dressed in full uniform, not because protocol demanded it, but because after 15 long years, the Air Force had reinstated her active status specifically for this appearance. She wore her scar beneath a ceremonial ribbon, right where a citation should have been. The committee chair, a gray-haired congressman from Ohio with a long reputation for sidestepping anything controversial, adjusted his microphone. Captain Dawson, if us, he said, thank you for being here today. Let's begin with your account of Operation Halberd, Syria, October 19, 2008. Mera's voice never faltered. For the next 45 minutes, she laid out every detail. The original mission parameters, the coordinate change, the drone strike, the aftermath, the silencing. She named every contractor, analyst, and officer involved. She referenced time logs, intercepted comms, radio transcripts, and conflicting satellite data. She submitted photos, her scorched flight vest, her burned boots, and a jagged fragment of drone casing she had kept hidden all these years. The room remained silent, save for the rustling of notepaper and the soft tapping of laptops. A senator broke the silence. Captain Dawson, he asked, you're asserting that your injuries were deliberately left out of the official reports. Do you have definitive proof that this was part of a cover-up? Yes, she answered. The communications logs and encryption keys I submitted show that operational orders were remotely deleted 3 minutes after the strike occurred. That's not a system glitch. That's an intentional protocol. Who authorized the deletion? Colonel Henry Wexler. He was stationed at CENTCOM at the time. He now holds an executive position at Elbridge Strategic Systems. The senator jotted something down with furious intensity. Another voice joined in. Are you suggesting that private defense contractors influence military decision-making? I'm not suggesting it, she replied calmly. I'm stating it, and we have the records to prove it. For the next 3 hours, Mera spoke. No one interrupted her again. When the committee recessed for lunch, Mera stepped outside and stood at the top of the Capitol steps. A cold breeze swept across her face, and within moments, a flood of reporters and photographers surged toward her. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her testimony was already echoing across every news outlet, every social feed, every policy office. Randall Kane leaned against a marble column nearby, waiting. He handed her a paper cup of coffee. You did well. They're not finished, she said. No, he agreed, but they're scared. That's a start. She took a quiet sip. What if they bury it again? She asked. He didn't reply because they both already knew the answer. That evening, Mera met with Secretary Hayes in a secure, windowless briefing room. 3 others were present, her security liaison, a digital forensics specialist, and an investigator from the Office of the Inspector General. They dimmed the lights and pulled up classified data, satellite overlays, traffic footage, mobile ping maps. Whoever threatened you, the forensics analyst began, had access to top-tier surveillance infrastructure. We traced the photo back to an NSA subline node, one that was supposedly decommissioned. That means it's internal. Not necessarily, Mera said. Could be a private contractor. Could be rogue. Hayes nodded gravely. We have reason to believe there's an unlisted group operating alongside traditional oversight structures, possibly under Elbridge's umbrella, possibly hidden under outdated counterterrorism directives. You think they're still active? We don't think, the investigator said. We know, and they know who you are. Mera leaned back in her chair. Then we make them reveal themselves. 2 nights later, she stood on stage at the Valor Integrity Gala, an annual fundraiser for wounded veterans. She hadn't intended to speak, but the organizers had insisted. The room was filled with polished shoes and sharper eyes. Donors, officers, hidden cameras. Randall watched from the back, arms folded, eyes on every entrance. Mera approached the microphone without notes. She didn't need them. They told me silence was duty, that forgetting was survival, that a scar without a citation was nothing more than skin. She paused. The room was still. They were wrong. The cost of truth isn't counted in medals. It's measured by what we're willing to risk to speak it. And I'm not. The speech had ended. Applause broke out in waves, crashing against the solemn stillness that had followed the final words. Phones shot into the air. Cameras flashed. Live streams lit up with reactions from around the world. People were still buzzing about what they had just witnessed when, an hour later, deep in the concrete shadows of the underground parking garage, a man emerged. Mera reacted instantly, her body coiled like a spring. He raised both hands quickly, palms open. No weapon. "Captain Dawson," he said, voice low but clear, "they're coming for you. You've made the wrong people bleed. But now, officially, you've found the one that bleeds them back." Then just as quickly, he crouched and dropped an envelope at her feet. Without another word, he bolted into the dark. Security gave chase, but he was gone before they could catch him. Just another shadow vanishing into the noise of a city too used to secrets. Inside the envelope, Mera found names, codes, operations, details she had seen before, buried in her redacted report, blacked out until they were meaningless. But not anymore. Now they were whole. By the next morning, Mera stood before Secretary Hayes, the envelope in her hand. She passed it to him with steady fingers and eyes that refused to blink. A full task force was mobilized within hours. Search warrants were authorized. Subpoenas were drafted and served. And a new name surged to the forefront of federal scrutiny: Elbridge Strategic Systems. The Department of Justice assigned Mera a direct liaison. Alana Reyes, a sharp-eyed DOJ lawyer with a surgical way of speaking and the kind of stare that never wavered. "If this shifts into criminal territory," Alana warned, crisp and precise, "you'll need to be ready to testify, not just in front of Congress, in court, against men with reach and history." "I'm ready," Mera answered without hesitation. "Then we move now, because they won't wait around, and they won't play fair." Within 48 hours, the war began in earnest. Two former Elbridge executives went off the grid. One turned up dead, found in a remote cabin in Montana. The other simply vanished, somewhere between Virginia and Qatar, like a ghost slipping across borders. A third tried to flee, but was intercepted and arrested at Dulles International. It hit the news cycles like a lightning strike. The reckoning Mera had evaded for years had arrived, and this time it wasn't letting her go. But she didn't run. She had waited 15 years to be heard. Now, finally, they were listening. The entire nation was watching. Even she didn't anticipate how fast it would unfold. Within just 1 week, the DOJ issued sealed indictments against 5 individuals. 2 were former executives of Elbridge. One was a retired Air Force colonel, another a tech contractor. The 5th, a sitting intelligence liaison. The charges ranged across a spectrum of misconduct: obstruction of justice, willful destruction of classified military records, conspiracy to commit fraud against the U.S. government. To the public, the names were hidden, but not from Mera. She received the list privately. Every name triggered something old and sharp in her mind. One of them had once shaken her hand after a ceremony she hadn't even been allowed to attend. Another had quietly approved the changes in the drone targeting algorithm that nearly killed her and decimated her team. They were no longer faceless bureaucrats. They had faces, histories, and fingerprints on every scar she carried. That same afternoon, Randall Kane found her outside the Justice Department. The sky was overcast, the clouds hanging low like a threat. Rain flirted with the edge of falling. "You should take a break," he said quietly. "You've done your part. They have the names now. Let them chase the rest." "I'm not tired," she answered. "You will be," Kane replied gently. "When the cameras disappear, when the hearings end, that's when it really settles in. I'm already there." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Kane reached into his coat and handed her a thumb drive. Small, innocuous, but heavy with meaning. "Last piece," he said, "from a tech I trusted back then. This links the ghost commands from your strike directly to Elbridge's prototype AI threat analysis system. Same one they sold to the DoD the year after." Mera took it without saying a word. She didn't have to. That tiny device wasn't just the final breadcrumb. It was a detonator, proof that what had been called a battlefield mistake was, in fact, a built-in flaw. Designed, deployed, sold for profit. That night, back in her apartment, She sat alone at her desk. The thumb drive held hundreds of files, dense technical data, algorithmic threat rankings, simulation deployments, and sequences of auto-prioritized strikes. She scrolled slowly, methodically. Deep in the archive, she found what mattered most: a time-stamped command log from October 2008. Her mission coordinates had been rerouted through a then untested program, Project Blue Atlas. The AI had misclassified her unit as a threat based on corrupted input from a junior analyst. The algorithm flagged them and no human stepped in to correct the error. No override, just execution. And afterward, a cover-up that buried the truth to ensure the system's rollout continued uninterrupted. They hadn't just let her team burn, they lit the fire and then sold the matches. She stared at the screen for a long time before opening a new document. The report she compiled was spare, focused, surgical in its clarity. Then she sent it to DOJ, to Secretary Hayes, and to Alana Reyes with a subject line that cut like a scalpel. Proof of intent to suppress fatal flaw, immediate danger to active systems. By morning, the DOJ had elevated the case to the White House. A presidential cybersecurity task force was created. The Blue Atlas system was immediately pulled from 6 Air Force installations and suspended pending further review. The media frenzy went into overdrive. Mera Dawson's name surged again into headlines. To some, she was a patriot. To others, a traitor dismantling the shield of national defense. One op-ed ran with the headline, "When one scar brings down an empire." She didn't read it. Instead, she met with Alana Reyes in a sealed room. No windows, no signals. A secure government office tucked deep inside the unremarkable downtown maze. "You've just dismantled the most expensive defense contract of the last 5 years, Alana said, leaning across the table. "You've proven it was built on a broken engine. They won't take that lightly." "They're already making moves," Mera said, sliding a photo across the table. It had been taken the night before. Someone had broken into her car. They didn't steal anything. They didn't vandalize. They left only one item: her old pilot wings, bent, blood-stained. Alana didn't even blink. "We're escalating your protection. You'll be moved, alias, new location. Until the inquiry wraps, we keep you off the radar." "I'm not hiding." "You're not," Alana said. "You're surviving. And that matters more." That evening, Mera was relocated. Her new home was a secure federal townhouse tucked into a quiet residential street outside Annapolis. The windows were reinforced. Every entry point had eyes, cameras, alarms, silent trip lines. She was given a new phone, a secure laptop, and a civilian cover identity, a retired Navy consultant. The transition rattled her. Everything about it felt wrong. Confinement wasn't in her nature. She had survived fire, betrayal, and silence. But now it was different. Now she wasn't just a survivor. She was a threat. To Elbridge, to those who had profited off silence, and to every institution that chose plausible deniability over justice. With time on her hands, she began to dig again. Alana gave her access to a secure database containing drone reports going back 15 years. Mera combed through each line, each incident. The patterns were unmistakable. Phrases that repeated like bad echoes. Target misclassified. Signal discrepancy. Protocol override. Time and again, the system at fault was Blue Atlas or its earlier prototypes. And every time, the result was the same. Civilians dead, allies burned, operatives erased. Her scar, she realized, wasn't the beginning. It was just the first one someone had lived to name. Then, late one night, a message arrived, encrypted, anonymous. "I worked on Atlas. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I have more. Meet me." Coordinates followed. An abandoned library in Baltimore. Mera paused. It could be a setup. She showed it to her security detail, who immediately advised against any contact. She ignored them. Randall Kane insisted on coming. 2 other agents trailed them from a distance. But when they reached the crumbling library, Mera stepped inside alone. Beneath a flickering light surrounded by shadows and silence, she waited. A man stepped out from the shadows, his posture tense, his movements brisk, as if he were afraid of being followed. He looked to be in his early 30s, wire-framed glasses perched on a nervous face, his entire presence radiating unease. Cole, he said, giving only his first name. I worked on interface integrity for Blue Atlas. His voice was low, hurried, edged with guilt and exhaustion. After the 2008 log deletions, I tried to raise the red flag. I submitted an internal alert. 2 weeks later, they terminated me, slapped a non-disclosure clause in my exit paperwork. I signed it. I was terrified. He paused, breathing shallowly. His hands trembled as he held out a tablet. But after what you said in Congress, I can't stay silent anymore. Mera took the device from him. On the screen were more logs, detailed simulations, time-stamped entries, system stress test results. At the top was a memo stamped urgent in red, potential civilian targeting error rate exceeding 7.4% at Tier 7 AI classification. We knew, Cole muttered. We ran simulations. We proposed a patch, but leadership shelved it, claimed the operational downtime was too expensive, that it would affect performance metrics during contract review. He clenched his jaw. So they let it ride. Mera exhaled slowly, her grip on the tablet tightening. And now, she asked, now they're cleaning house, covering tracks. What's left is disappearing fast. My access gets cut off in 36 hours, maybe less. She locked eyes with him. There was no fear in hers, only resolve. Then we don't waste a second. They didn't. By the time dawn crept across the skyline, they had backed up every critical file, cataloged each anomaly, and mapped out the command structure that had authorized, ignored, or concealed the failures. The cracks weren't just spreading, they were breaking the entire foundation apart. For 36 relentless hours, Mera and Cole worked shoulder to shoulder inside a secured safe house. Sleep was a forgotten luxury. Their eyes were red, fingers raw, but they kept digging, analyzing corrupted code fragments, correlating field incidents with AI targeting data, matching metadata tags to real-world tragedies. Each new revelation painted a darker picture than the last. A field agent marked hostile because of a mismatched geolocation string. A medevac drone shot down after being reclassified as a potential strike vehicle. A rural school near a degraded relay tower, flagged, bombed, erased. All of it tracked back to one flawed core, Blue Atlas. At precisely 5 o'clock a.m., they uploaded the full dossier, code bases, system logs, internal correspondence, and command orders onto the Department of Justice's encrypted server. The moment the final file transferred, Cole sat motionless, staring at the confirmation screen. His hands were shaking. That was it, he said, voice barely audible. That was my entire career. Mera looked at him, unwavering. No, she said. You just saved lives. 1 hour later, Alana Reyes called. Her tone was clipped, urgent. We got the drop. DOJ has activated a special investigative council. This is now a formal criminal inquiry into Elbridge Systems and its defense subcontractors. I need you both in protective custody. Now. By noon, Mera and Cole had been relocated to a secure black site outside of Washington, D.C., a subterranean federal facility, tightly guarded, buried beneath multiple levels of classified access. Inside, Mera was debriefed by agents from Homeland Security, senior officials from the Air Force Inspector General's office, and DOJ's rapidly growing task force. Cole gave sworn testimony, revealing passwords, names, and the full scope of deployments connected to Blue Atlas. The investigation exploded in scope. Later that evening, Mera stepped out of the bunker for a breath of air, the night wind stirring the trees at the fence line. Randall Kane stood near the perimeter, silent and still, watching the branches sway. They're not going to let this end quietly, he said without turning. No, Mera agreed, but it's too big now to bury. Randall nodded solemnly. They'll push back the only way they can. How? Disinformation, character attacks, you know the drill. And she did. The next morning it began. A shadowy dossier appeared online under an anonymous leak. It accused Mera of falsifying the deployment records. It questioned the legitimacy of her service file. It went further, implying psychological instability, citing outdated medical evaluations, twisting context into suspicion. A retired general who once authored her commendation appeared on a fringe news program, subtly casting doubt on her intentions. Mera watched the broadcast in silence. Then she shut off the screen and turned to Randall. "I'm done fighting ghosts," she said coldly. "Now I'm fighting cowards." Congress responded within the week. Mera's allies pushed back hard, and the Senate Oversight Committee called an emergency session. This time, she wasn't summoned as a witness. She was asked to brief. Inside the chamber, she stood before a high-resolution display, a digital world map lighting up with red markers. One by one, they pulsed across 5 continents. "This," Mera began, "is what Blue Atlas got wrong." Each glowing point represented a misclassification. Each point was a human being who should not have died. Silence fell like a heavy blanket. One senator finally spoke. "Are you saying the system was knowingly released with these defects?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "The logs confirm it. Internal documents express concern, then pivot to profitability." Another senator leaned forward. "And the military chain of command?" "Some opposed it. Most complied. A few profited." The briefing stretched on for 2 hours. When Mera finally exited the chamber, her phone buzzed. It was Cole. "They're wiping me," he said. "Access keys revoked. My old apartment's been cleaned out. Even my backup cloud account. Gone." "Are you safe?" "For now." Mera didn't pause. She contacted Alana, then Randall. Within an hour, Cole was pulled from his location and moved again, this time to a deeper, more secure site. Back at the federal compound, Mera was summoned for a private meeting with Secretary Hayes. "We're at the threshold," Hayes told her. "The president's been briefed. If your evidence holds, and it does, Elbridge's defense contracts will be voided. Lawsuits will follow. Some high-ranking defense officials may be indicted, including, possibly, myself." She held his gaze. "You'll be pulled into the public eye," Hayes continued, "not just as a witness, as a symbol." Mera didn't answer right away, but when she did, her voice was calm and resolute. If they want a symbol, they better be ready for one that fights back. That night, Secretary Hayes went live with a formal announcement. Blue Atlas was suspended indefinitely. All active operations were frozen. A joint task force would begin auditing every military deployment connected to the system. The response was instant. Elbridge's stock nosedived. Whistleblowers came forward from across the country. Families of victims rallied, demanding accountability and justice. In just 72 hours, Mera received more than 4,000 emails, support, testimonies, warnings, and one message that stood out above the rest. The subject line read, "You're not finished." The body, "There's still one more name, one more command. Find it." Attached it was a heavily garbled audio file, an old log from 2008. Mera played it again and again. Amid the static and distortion, a phrase slowly emerged, unmistakable once heard. "Override command accepted. Authorization, Trident." She froze. Trident wasn't a program. It was a clearance level, a rare, high-level override credential that bypassed every built-in safeguard. In 2008, only 3 individuals had held Trident-level access. She knew all of them. One was dead. One had quietly retired, slipping into the world of defense lobbying. The third was still active, still in command, still cloaked in silence. Mera sat alone in the dim room, headphones tight over her ears, replaying the audio. Again, every loop cracked through another layer of deception. Every repetition burned the word deeper into her mind. Trident. 3 syllables that splintered the lies she'd been told. She dove into old field manuals, reviewed clearance hierarchies, accessed archived staff rosters from 2008. The names came back to her like ghosts. 1. Eliminated during a classified training incident. 1. Now a private defense consultant with no clear answers on record. And the third, Major General Braden Lasker. Still active, still influential, still silent. He had once served as Director of Strategic Systems Integration, the very position that authorized the first AI field tests. After Mera's unit was decimated in Syria, it was Lasker who issued a public statement hailing the operation as a milestone in autonomous threat recognition. Later, he quietly took over as chair of the Blue Atlas Advisory Council. And now, he was the last name left, the last silence waiting to be broken. She had seen his face before, on panels, in briefings, on televised hearings. He was always composed, always measured, always deflecting. But now that she knew, now that the truth had found a name and a face, she couldn't unsee it. That calm demeanor masked something far more insidious. Mera dialed Alana Reyes immediately. "He's still in command?" she asked, already knowing the answer would haunt her. "Technically," Alana replied, her voice tight with tension. "He oversees a new division now. Joint Future Threat Analysis. But yes, he's still inside the Pentagon." Mera's jaw clenched. "Then he's the one who authorized the override. He's the last link." A heavy silence fell between them. Then Alana said without hesitation, "We'll need confirmation." "You know I'll get it," Mera answered, already planning her next move. The following morning, she arrived unannounced at the Office of Military Records. Her cover was thin, a request to review her own service file. It was enough to bypass the front gate, especially with the quiet support of a sympathetic Air Force captain who had followed her case since the beginning. The captain didn't ask unnecessary questions. He led her to a restricted access terminal. Mera requested system logs from October 2008, citing a classified archive tag, 7017 Alpha. They waited in silence. The minutes stretched. 10 minutes later, a message blinked on the screen in stark red letters. "Access restricted. Trident level authorization required." The captain's brow furrowed in confusion. "That's not even supposed to trigger a traceable flag," he murmured. "It should just deny access. No footprint." "Well, it just did," Mera said, already snapping a photo of the screen with a secure device. Proof. Not only did Major General Lasker hold Trident-level clearance, he had used that clearance on the exact day her mission had been compromised. He had overridden the targeting system personally. That night, under tight security in a Department of Justice briefing room, Mera met with Alana and General Randall Kane. She laid the printed log on the table. "He's the one," she said. "There's no one else it could have been. Not at that level, not at that time." Alana's expression was grim. She didn't argue. "This just moved," she said, her voice low. "From a corporate scandal to an active military conspiracy." Randall leaned back, arms folded, his face unreadable. "We bring this to the president. Tonight." Mera hesitated. "Will he even believe it?" Randall shook his head. "He doesn't get the luxury of disbelief anymore." The meeting took place deep within the West Wing, behind 3 layers of biometric security. Mera entered a narrow conference room flanked by 2 Secret Service agents. Inside, the president was already seated alongside the National Security Advisor, Secretary Hayes, and the DOJ legal team. Hayes introduced Mera, but she didn't need prompting. No notes, no hesitation. She laid out the evidence, the system override, the Trident clearance log, the precise timing. Then she played the audio file. The room went still. The president said nothing for a long stretch. Then finally he looked directly at her. "Are you willing to testify against a currently serving general?" "Yes," Mera answered instantly. There was no waver in her voice. Hayes turned to the team. "We'll need to detain Lasker for questioning, but his level of clearance gives him multiple shields of immunity. This won't be a clean operation." The president stood. "Then don't make it clean," he said. "Make it loud." 2 days later, federal marshals and military police stormed a secure Pentagon sub-facility. Major General Braden Lasker was arrested without incident. His office was sealed immediately. Every device, every communication node confiscated. He was escorted through the corridors as aides looked away and reporters captured the moment from behind velvet stanchions. The image went viral within the hour. CNN's headline blared by "General arrested in expanding Blue Olympics Atlas scandal." BBC followed. Trident override tied to 2008 friendly fire strike, and Mera's name trended again. That night, Lasker's legal team released a formal statement. They claimed he had acted in accordance with protocol, that the override was being misrepresented, and that Mera Dawson was engaged in a personal vendetta. But this time the backlash didn't stick. The public had shifted. Veterans groups began posting images, side-by-sides of Mera's scar and Lasker's commendation photo. The hashtag started to trend. Trident brokers override justice. Privately, brokers began selling off shares. Mera met with Cole in the DOJ war room later that night. He looked bone-weary but laser-focused. "They're trying to purge the old servers," he said without preamble. I intercepted a command packet. It's a remote wipe order for the legacy archive. Can we stop it? Mera asked. There's only one way, Cole said. We need physical access. To what? The cold room, sublevel C, offsite archive, Delaware storage node. Mera didn't blink. Then we go. Alana stepped in quickly. No, you're not an agent. You're a key witness. Let the DOJ handle this. If we wait, Mera said, eyes locked on hers, they'll scrub it clean. You know they will. Secretary Hayes intervened. You'll go, he said firmly, but not alone. The next morning, Mera, Cole, and 2 federal agents arrived at a plain concrete facility in Delaware. There were no signs, no flags, no visible markings, just a black access panel and a camera lens that blinked once before unlocking the side door. Mera wore civilian clothes over a Kevlar vest. Cole carried a hardened drive and a terminal decryptor. They entered quickly and moved through narrow hallways until they reached a pair of reinforced steel doors labeled Sublevel C, restricted. Inside, the temperature dropped sharply. A sterile coldness settled in her bones. Endless rows of humming server towers lined the room, each encased in black glass and chrome. Automated lights blinked softly like silent beacons. This one, Cole said, stopping at Rack 41B. He connected his drive and began the data transfer. Mera stood guard with the 2 agents, watching every flicker of the overhead lights. Halfway through, the room dimmed. What was that? One of the agents asked. A metallic voice crackled through the intercom. You are in violation of federal storage protocol. Disconnect immediately. Cole didn't even flinch. He kept copying. Then came the siren, loud, mechanical, urgent. Mera stepped in front of the server rack, placing her body between Cole and any threat. The agents drew their sidearms. Minutes later, facility security stormed in. But before they could breach the chamber, they were intercepted by DOJ marshals, already deployed by Alana's emergency call from D.C. After nearly 20 tense minutes, the transfer was complete. Cole yanked the drive. We got it, he said, breathless. Mera exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. The first light of dawn is breaking when they stepped back outside. The weight of 15 years now rested in a single armored case. The cold room data was the final piece. Not just in Lasker's indictment, but in tearing down the entire scaffolding of secrecy and complicity that had let Blue Atlas operate unchecked. Back in Washington, the drive was transported under full escort to the DOJ's Cybercrime Division. Mera and Cole watched as the data was uploaded to a secure terminal. For hours, forensic analysts verified the files. Then something shifted, the room filled with a quiet intensity. Document after document revealed a buried protocol. Phantom Slate, a fail-safe built directly into Blue Atlas. It allowed select Trident-level users to override identification parameters in real time. The log showed it had been used 9 times. 7 resulted in friendly fire. 2 led to civilian deaths. Each override had required voice authorization. 6 of those belonged to Lasker. The remaining 3, other generals. By morning, federal warrants were issued for the remaining Trident-level officers. 1 surrendered. The other tried to flee through diplomatic channels in Brussels. He didn't make it. Elbridge's legal team collapsed in full view of the press. Multiple board members resigned. Investors fled. The Department of Defense terminated all remaining contracts. And Blue Atlas was dead. But there was no sense of victory for Mera, just momentum. Most of her days were now spent in classified briefings. Her nights, writing letters to the families of those killed in the strikes, at least the ones she could locate. Cole remained by her side, tracking down residual code patterns, anomalies in the eye that still lingered like ghosts in the system. The real work was only just beginning. The offshoot variants of Atlas hadn't disappeared. They had merely gone dormant, like seeds beneath the frost, waiting for the right conditions to bloom again. That's what made them dangerous. One quiet afternoon, as sunlight flickered between the columns outside the Department of Justice building, Randall Kane found her sitting alone on a stone bench. His posture was formal, yet subdued. He didn't waste time. You just brought down $1 billion empire, he said in a tone laced with both awe and something like remorse. How does it feel? Mera didn't look up. Her gaze remained fixed on her hands, resting motionless in her mop, fingers interlaced as though holding something fragile that couldn't be set down. Like I'm still carrying the pieces, she finally murmured. That's the price of surviving. You don't get to leave it behind. You just learn how to carry it differently. Kane nodded, silently acknowledging the weight of those words. After a pause, he added with a faint, almost bittersweet smile, "They're going to want to make a movie out of this." Her reply was quiet but firm. "Then make sure they get the scar right." It was early spring when the Air Force Academy invited Mera to speak. At first, she declined without hesitation. But a few days later, something shifted. Maybe it was the silence that followed Kane's words, or the memory of those who hadn't survived. She reconsidered. She stood alone on a stage inside a vast hall, staring into the eyes of cadets, some of whom had once whispered about her behind her back, others who had laughed. But now they stood still, silent, waiting. She spoke only once. "Truth without action is just noise," she said. "Make it echo." Then she stepped down. No theatrics, no flourish, just a quiet echo of meaning. The applause that followed was restrained, almost reverent, not thunderous but genuine. By the end of that same month, a signature from the Oval Office turned her legacy into policy. The president signed the Valor Integrity Reform Act, a sweeping bill that mandated independent audits of all AI-powered combat systems, introduced robust protections for whistleblowers working under military tech contracts, and established a permanent civilian oversight committee to monitor technological ethics in defense applications. The bill bore her name. She wasn't there for the signing. She didn't need to be. Mera was already chasing the next thread, a name that had quietly emerged in one of Cole's older system logs, something obscure, hidden between layers of code and operational chatter. This wasn't over, and she wasn't done. At first, the reference meant nothing to her. LR Handler C, Segment 12, Helium, Supal Amaspa Helix Iron Forkback. It sounded like a code fragment, a system anomaly. Most analysts dismissed it as a data artifact, residue from some outdated subsystem. But Mera had learned to listen to the silence between signals. She asked Cole to run a reverse trace on the data path, to follow the trail as far as it could go. What he found was buried beneath layers of flagged metadata in a data cluster marked for deletion. The file itself had a nondescript name, but its metadata embedded GPS coordinates. The location, a compound in Nevada, owned by a shell corporation with a single registered executive, Leonard Rhodes. The name jolted something in her memory. Leonard Rhodes. It took a second to place him. Years ago, after the 2008 Syria incident that left her wounded and nearly erased, he had been the quiet man who escorted her out of the infirmary. At the time, she thought he was just another bland, unremarkable consultant, his anonymity by design. Since then, he had disappeared from official records. No trace, no footprint. She took the name to Alana Reyes. He was never on the Atlas Project roster, Mera said, but he was always there, just outside the org charts, hovering on the edges. Alana frowned as the name triggered a flurry of half-remembered connections. "We've seen him," she said, her voice tightening. "Dark contracts, drone blacklists, proxy surveillance. Never direct, always through a chain of intermediaries." "Then let's make it direct." Within 48 hours, they had a federal surveillance warrant. When agents arrived at the Nevada compound, nominally a communications testing facility, the site had already been scrubbed clean. Not a document remained. No machines were active, except one. Behind a thermal barrier and a false wall, a single server still ran. Cole was flown in immediately to assist in its extraction. The server didn't hold much in terms of quantity, but what it contained was surgical in precision. A cache of authorization tokens rooted deep in Blue Atlas's system infrastructure, all signed with Rhodes's digital credentials. 3 of them had triggered silent kill functions, one of which aligned perfectly with the coordinates of Mera's friendly fire incident. He hadn't just signed off on the override. He had built the target classification parameters. He had written her name into the crosshairs. Leonard Rhodes hadn't disappeared. He had been promoted, shifted sideways into private contracting firms tied to Elbridge's spin-off tech subsidiaries. He wasn't hiding. He was still operating. Mera demanded to go into the field. Despite protests from Alana and the U.S. Marshals, she joined a 4-person task force on a mission to the Denver Data Conference. Rhodes was scheduled as a guest panelist, ironically, on AI ethics. She watched from the shadows as he took the stage, a ghost from her past dressed in a modern suit. His hair had turned silver at the temples, and his frame had thickened over the years. But his voice hadn't changed, calm, controlled, chilling in its certainty. When the panel ended, the marshals moved. Rhodes spotted them and bolted. He made it into the basement corridor, into the concrete silence of the underground parking garage before they cut off his escape. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't fight. But when Mera stepped into view, he froze. She looked him in the eyes, a storm of memory and rage behind hers. 15 years ago, she said quietly, you engineered that scar. He said nothing, but his eyes flicked. A subtle twitch, recognition, guilt, something between. He was handcuffed and escorted away. The arrest didn't make front-page news. Too arcane, too technical. But for the community of survivors, whistleblowers, and watchdogs, it was an earthquake. DOJ filed sealed indictments under a new legal category: strategic deception via artificial proxy. Rhodes became the first to be charged. The following months, Cole met Mera at a quiet cafe near Judiciary Square. You did it again, he said. Mera shook her head. No. This time we did it with our eyes open. Cole gave a tight nod. Rhodes will flip. They always do. He'll say he wasn't the one who built the system, that someone higher pulled the strings. Then we keep climbing, Mera replied. Minutes later, Alana arrived with an update. Rhodes submitted a partial plea agreement, she said. He's willing to testify. In exchange, he wants leniency. What's he giving us? Cole asked. Alana's expression darkened. He says it wasn't just Atlas, that it began long before, an interagency agreement, something called the Osprey Directive. Mera's eyes narrowed. I've never heard of it. No one has, Alana said. It's buried deep, but Cole's already digging. Cole nodded grimly. It predates Atlas, started as a NATO data-sharing protocol, then morphed into a kill chain automation prototype. Rhodes says he helped hardwire the decision thresholds. That's how Mera got flagged. Not for who I was, Mera said bitterly, but because of how the system interpreted me. Cole confirmed. Exactly. If Rhodes is telling the truth, then Atlas was just one child of a much older design. A chill fell across the table. This wasn't the end, it was the root. The Osprey Directive wasn't software. It wasn't a black site. It was a principle, scrawled in the margins of a defense conference held in Brussels in 2002. What began as theoretical talk among NATO analysts had metastasized into a sprawling network of off-the-books pacts, cross-agency data exchanges, and unregulated experimentation with autonomous targeting logic, all buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and corporate secrecy. Together, Mera, Alana, and Cole combed through every document Rhodes turned over in his plea deal, memos, technical specs, but one item cut deeper than the rest: a grainy video recording from a 2005 classified NATO advisory meeting. The footage was poor, static lines interrupted the feed, and the audio crackled. But one voice pierced through with chilling clarity. We must eliminate latency and lethal decisions, it said. Emotion is delay. Pattern recognition must override protocol. The speaker, Victor Hanlon, a retired Air Force general, former deputy director of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and possibly the architect of the Osprey Directive. Cole, once a quiet technician buried in the labyrinthine data of Trinex systems, now found himself unraveling threads that led to something far darker than anyone had expected. While working independently, he'd followed a trail buried deep within the Osprey archives. More than 20 references pointing directly to Victor Hanlon, the retired general now sitting comfortably on the board of Trinex's parent company, Elbridge. What he uncovered wasn't just incidental paperwork. Hanlon's name was scrawled across a classified funding memorandum that predated the launch of Blue Atlas. And far more disturbing, his unmistakable signature had authorized a directive greenlighting autonomous drone tests in live conflict zones, all without public knowledge, international coordination, or allied oversight. The list of locations was chilling in its familiarity. Yemen, Ukraine, the tribal belts of northwest Pakistan. Mera Dawson sat staring at the data on the screen, her breath caught somewhere between rage and resolve. This had never been about one isolated weapon system. Atlas wasn't merely a technical failure. It was a master plan, a calculated template for future operations. Alana Reyes stood beside her, face drawn tight. "Hanlon isn't someone we can just subpoena and call it a day," she said grimly. "He's protected, deeply. Civilian status now, multiple legal firewalls, political shields, old alliances. He's not untouchable, but it'll take precision." She paused. "If we can prove he was directly involved in making the final targeting decisions, then he set off the first domino," Cole cut in, his voice sharp with urgency. "There's another angle. He maintained a private server, not through Trinex, entirely separate, off-grid. It's hosted overseas, somewhere in Luxembourg, I think. I'm almost certain it holds the original kill chain test logs." Alana turned to Mera. "Can we access it?" "Only with a black warrant," Mera replied, "and a cybersecurity team capable of operating without triggering alerts." That evening, they briefed Secretary Hayes in a secure meeting room. She listened in complete silence, letting the facts land without interruption. When Mera finished laying out the final pieces of the puzzle, Hayes tapped the end of her pen gently against the polished wood desk. "I've fought a lot of bureaucracies," she said after a long pause. "But this isn't red tape. It's something older, colder." Hanlon created a phantom system. He wrapped it in alliances and cloaked it in national interest, like armor. She turned to Alana. "You said the server's in Luxembourg?" "We believe so," Alana confirmed. "And we have leverage, treaty protocols that can grant us access, if we move fast." Hayes nodded slowly. "Then move. Quietly. I'll handle state." Within 48 hours, an unprecedented joint operation was launched. The DA, working in coordination with the European Cybercrime Center, led a cyber forensics strike on a data facility tucked inside the industrial edge of Luxembourg. There, housed among decoy servers and encrypted firewalls, they found what they were looking for: Hanlon's off-grid archive. Dozens of drives were seized and immediately flown back to the U.S. under diplomatic seal. The contents of those drives told a story that rewrote the moral calculus of modern warfare. In a DOJ conference room lit by harsh overhead fluorescence, the team sat in stunned silence as the files were decrypted. Mera, composed yet visibly bracing herself, read aloud from the logs. They showed that Hanlon had not only authorized test strikes on targets known to be falsified, he had orchestrated them to generate favorable data curves. Civilian heat signatures had been deliberately mislabeled during simulations to mimic enemy combatants. In one horrifying scenario, a field test had locked onto a hospital under the fabricated rationale of a rebel stronghold. Hanlon had personally annotated the test with the phrase, "tolerable delta." Mera's voice didn't tremble, but the room did. Within hours, the White House was briefed. The president demanded immediate transparency. Hanlon was issued a formal summons to testify before a federal oversight committee. He refused to appear. Instead, he released a pre-recorded video statement. His voice was calm, rehearsed. "All of my actions," he insisted, "were within the bounds of classified experimental research. Strategic deterrence requires bold thinking. Sometimes it demands innovation that makes people uncomfortable." Mera watched his face on the screen without blinking. Then she turned off the monitor, stood, and filed an affidavit requesting to give sworn testimony, not only about Blue Atlas, but about Osprey, and every layer of obfuscation stacked behind the lie. Alana pulled her aside afterward. "This isn't just risky, Mera. It's explosive. You'll be naming people who don't show up on paper, and they don't play by the rules." "I already know that," Mera replied, "and I'm naming them anyway." The second oversight hearing was held in a larger chamber this time. Cameras were banned. No media. Only official transcripts would record what was said. Mera sat at the witness table flanked by DOJ counsel. She opened a folder and, for the first time, read from a prepared statement. "I was injured by a drone that had no human in its chain of command," she said. "But that wasn't the real wound. The real wound was systemic. It was inflicted by policy, a policy authorized in secret, protected by silence, and hidden beneath layers of deliberate ambiguity. The Osprey directive wasn't an error. It was a sequence of deliberate decisions, hundreds of them, made by men who believed delay was weakness, who saw compassion as inefficiency, who thought oversight was optional. She looked up from her page. I survived. Many others didn't. The silence that followed lasted longer than applause ever could. For 4 hours, she fielded questions. She cited dates with precision, named people, traced the flow of decision-making from Trinex to Elbridge and back again, drawing a clean line to Hanlon's design. Her testimony became the legal cornerstone of what was now forming into a national investigation. Outside, reporters clustered like storm clouds. None were allowed in, out of heart. But within 12 hours, the full transcript was leaked. The public reaction was immediate and electric. Candlelight vigils appeared on university campuses, in memory of drone strike victims whose names had never made the news. Military discussion boards exploded into bitter debates. Defense lobbyists scrambled to disassociate. The House Armed Services Committee initiated a full-scale audit of Blue Atlas and its predecessors. Then, Hanlon vanished. For 72 hours, no one could locate him. His office was empty, his apartment untouched. No flights, no car rentals, just silence. And then, on the fourth morning, Mera received an anonymous package. No sender, no markings. Inside, a small black USB drive and a note, scrawled in unsteady handwriting. Not all ghosts die in silence. The drive sat untouched on her desk for hours before she dared to insert it into a secure, air-gapped system. She ran every scan, verified the firmware, searched for traps, and then opened it. Inside was a single folder. 6 video files dated between 2003 and 2008, each one labeled only Directive. She played the first. Grainy footage revealed a dim conference room, 8 men seated around a long table. At the head, Hanlon. Their conversation delved into early AI targeting models, layered heuristics, and shared intelligence datasets. One line spoken by Hanlon pierced through the static. Every delay is an opportunity cost in war. We can't afford ethics that show up late. The second file was worse. Footage from a test site in Yemen, a drone camera locked onto a structure marked hostile. Off-screen, an analyst whispered uncertainly, "The signal isn't confirmed." Hanlon's voice, off-camera, replied, "Run it anyway, we need a data curve." The missile hit. The screen went white with smoke. The third file showed Leonard Rhodes confirming back-end access between Elbridge's servers and targeting systems. A discussion followed on using NATO metadata to strengthen early strike prediction models. The fourth was a presentation, Emotion Threshold Suppression. It outlined techniques to reduce compassion in AI decision-making. One slide read, "Resolve is cleanest without conscience." Mera sat frozen. The fifth file, October 2008, her strike. A command interface displayed her unit's coordinates, blinking red. Rhodes' voice said, "We've got a gray flag, unclear status, friend or foe." Hanlon replied, "Then the system is wrong, or she is." Seconds later, the screen exploded in white. The final file was dated 5 days after her discharge. A single camera confession. Hanlon alone looked directly at the lens. "They'll bury this, they always do," he said. "But if one of them survives, if even one of them returns, then the equation changes. Guilt is a terrible algorithm." He looked down. The screen went black. Mera handed the drive to Alana that night. By midnight, the Department of Justice had a signed warrant in hand, charging Victor Hanlon with conspiracy, war crimes under international law, and obstruction of federal oversight. Interpol was notified. 3 days after the red notice was issued, Hanlon was found in Tangiers. He surrendered without resistance, silent from the moment they cuffed him. But the videos, those whispered truths sealed inside years of silence, spoke louder than he ever could. First screened behind closed doors, they were soon declassified. When they reached the public, outrage erupted like a long-contained storm. An international tribunal demanded his extradition. The Pentagon issued a public apology. The president addressed the nation. Mera was invited to stand among dignitaries and press. She declined. Instead, she traveled, quietly, deliberately, to visit the families of every lost member of her squad. One by one, she sat with them. One by one, she placed a final copy of the video into their hands. And each time she said what none of them had ever been told. I'm sorry, they lied to you, they lied to us, but it ends now. Some cried, some just stared. One mother held her and didn't let go for what felt like forever. Mera didn't expect forgiveness, and she didn't offer excuses. It wasn't closure. It was the beginning of something long denied. Memory reclaimed. That night, she returned to Arlington, standing alone at the Air Force Memorial. Same place, same arch of steel, same thick silence. But this time, she wore her uniform. Not for honor, not for recognition, but for those who no longer could. As the sun rose, casting light across the granite, she slipped a folded summary of the Osprey Directive beneath a marble bench and walked away. Not because it was over, but because, at last, it had begun to mean something. She returned to D.C., her body upright, but her bones still bearing the weight of what she'd seen in that final video. Across the ocean, the tribunal in The Hague advanced with extraordinary speed. A special session convened to try Hanlon and 3 of his former associates for war crimes. For the first time in history, an AI strategist, still technically a civilian, would be tried for what he'd done with code. Meanwhile, a different reckoning unfolded on American soil. Inside the Pentagon, long shielded by bureaucracy, an internal purge began. 10 officials were suspended, 5 stepped down. A federal commission was formed to audit every AI-driven targeting system deployed in the last 2 decades. Mera was asked to join. She said yes. On her first day inside the commission chamber, she took her seat across from men who had once rubber-stamped her silence. They avoided her eyes. She returned the favor. Cole was appointed as the lead technical advisor. Alana Reyes, now a key DOJ liaison, sat beside her. Randall Kane declined any formal role, but came anyway, week after week, taking a quiet place in the gallery like a watchman standing guard over justice. For 3 relentless weeks, they poured through systems, dissected logic trees, and re-examined kill chain signatures. Mera asked the same question over and over. Where is the human in this decision? More often than not, the answer was chilling. Absent. Then during a closed-door session, Cole dropped a new revelation. Blue Atlas hadn't just been used. It had been mirrored. A private defense firm, Darbridge Dynamics, had cloned its architecture and adapted it for civilian use. Predictive policing, urban surveillance, automatic warrant triggers. Mera froze. You're telling me the same decision tree that misread my squad is now flagging civilians? Cole nodded grimly. 7 states, different names, but yes, it's active. She turned to Alana. Alana exhaled, her voice flat. This isn't cleanup, it's contagion. The commission filed an emergency request to expand its jurisdiction. Hearings doubled in frequency. Mera barely had time to rest. She was exhausted, but she never missed a day. In The Hague, Hanlon's trial opened. The courtroom watched as photos of Mera's scar were shown side by side with drone telemetry logs. Then came the 6th video, the one from the black USB, the one where Hanlon spoke. When his face appeared, murmurs vanished. Silence claimed the room. His defense tried to shift blame, arguing abstraction. Hanlon had designed systems, not push buttons. But the digital logs were unforgiving. The executions had his authorization. Mera's testimony, delivered via video, cut through the semantic fog. He said latency was a weakness, but hesitation isn't failure, it's humanity. He erased that. We paid the price. 4 days later, the verdict came in, guilty on every count. The court sentenced Hanlon to life in international detention without the possibility of parole. His associates each received multi-decade sentences. It was historic. But Mera didn't celebrate. Instead, she stood before the Oversight Commission one last time. Her voice was steady. Her demand was final. Dismantle all legacy code, Blue Atlas, Osprey, and everything derived from them. Not just shut them down. Erase them. Purge the architecture. They're not systems. They're shadows. And shadows remember how to come back. The vote passed, 11-1. The lone dissenting voice approached her afterward. You know this puts us back years, right? No, Mera said quietly. It puts us back on track. With people, not programs. Weeks later, she visited her old flight academy. A wing had been named after her. She laughed at the absurdity. Then she cried. Inside, standing before a new class of cadets, she spoke plainly. When you sit behind a screen, or a console, or a cockpit, ask yourself what you're not seeing. Then wait, just a second longer. Sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is hesitate. They listened. They took notes. That was enough. That night, she walked the National Mall in silence. The Capitol shimmered behind scaffolding, a nation under reconstruction. In her jacket pocket, she carried one small, battered relic, a bent dog tag recovered from her strike zone. She took it out, let her thumb drift across the scratched words, still standing. She sat beside the reflecting pool and watched the water go still. Not to forget, to remember, and to prepare for what would come next. 6 months passed. Now Mera stood in front of a blank white wall inside a museum that hadn't existed the year before. The National Center for Ethical Technology had opened in Washington, D.C., without ceremony but with purpose. Funded by watchdogs, military ethicists, and human rights organizations, the center was built to do what no line of code ever could: remember. At the heart of the main exhibit, encased in spotless glass, was a scorched flight vest. Hers. Beside it, a printed transcript of her testimony. And nearby, a screen that rotated clips from the Osprey directive hearings. One recording played on loop, Hanlon's final admission. If even one comes back, the math changes. A young girl wearing an OTC shirt stood nearby, reading the text aloud under her breath. When she looked up and saw Mera standing there, her eyes widened. "You're her." Mera gave a small nod. The girl hesitated, then said, almost in a whisper, "Thank you for not stopping." Mera didn't respond right away. Then she smiled. "I didn't know how." Outside, the world spun on. Headlines came and went. Hearings convened and adjourned. Lobbyists moved through corridors. Debates flared on every screen. But Mera, for the first time in years, felt something settle inside her. Balance. The tribunal had concluded. The Oversight Commission's work had evolved into permanent regulatory review. Cole now led a global lab focused on AI integrity. Randall still came to every public session, not as a leader but as a witness. On a crisp autumn morning beneath a cloudless sky, Mera Dawson boarded a military transport bound for Ramstein Air Base. This time, she wasn't flying out as a decorated veteran, nor as a victim, but as a survivor whose story had stirred the conscience of a system built to forget. NATO Command had invited her not for ceremony, but for truth. Her briefing lasted precisely 20 minutes. No medals, no PowerPoints, just a closing slide with a single quiet sentence. What you ought to, you must still answer for. When she finished, the room fell into a profound silence. One general stood and offered a salute. Mera didn't return it. She offered a slight nod instead, acknowledgment, not approval, then turned and walked away. Back in Colorado, her days became simpler. Mornings were for long walks, free from the hum of interviews and the scrutiny of headlines. She didn't speak much anymore. Not because she had nothing left to say, but because silence had changed. It no longer screamed inside her. Her scar, once a pull at her skin, had softened. She received letters from survivors, policymakers, and even parents, some grateful, some grieving. One envelope arrived from the sister of a technician who had helped build the earliest Blue Atlas prototypes. He always said something felt wrong, the letter read, but he was afraid of being labeled disloyal. He would have followed you. Mera folded the letter gently and placed it in a cedar box on her bookshelf, next to a worn dog tag. She closed the lid, not to forget, but to protect what mattered. On the anniversary of the friendly fire strike, she returned to Arlington. Same bench, same view. But this time, someone was waiting. A young man, older now, stood as she approached. He was the cadet who had once laughed at her scar. His posture was straight, his voice steady. "I'm sorry." Mera studied him for a moment, then said quietly, "Don't be. Just do better." He nodded once and walked away, leaving her alone beneath the rising sun. She didn't move. She didn't speak. Yet in that motionless moment, there was peace. Not because the noise was gone, but because the truth was finally allowed to exist. That at last was enough. They called it a scar, But over the years, it became something more, an emblem, a signature that would echo beyond her own life. In the halls of justice, in congressional hearings, and in the footnotes of military doctrine, her name marked the shift. The AI Oversight Act passed without a single dissenting vote. Whistleblowers long silenced were not only reinstated but protected. In flight schools from dusty bases in Texas to gleaming towers in Talon, cadets now studied the Dawson Clause, a human override no longer just written in code, but in the very culture of command. Because Mera Dawson didn't just survive a blast, she redefined the aftermath. Some stories don't resolve with justice, they resolve with memory. For Captain Dawson, surviving wasn't merely enduring the explosion. It was about walking through decades of denial, through corridors engineered to deflect blame and obscure truth. For 15 years, she carried the weight of a scar the military refused to name, until, at last, a cadet's careless comment and a general's overdue confession split the silence wide open. What followed wasn't just an investigation, it was a recalibration of honor, a reconfiguration of accountability, a reckoning that reshaped the very structure of war. Mera never asked to become a symbol. She didn't wear ribbons, she didn't campaign for recognition. But she kept showing up, in hearing rooms, in locked archives, in front of senators, survivors, and stone-faced committees. And each time she stood, the world around her shifted slightly, because the scar on her chest wasn't just damaged tissue, it was living testimony. It was undeniable proof that the buried still breathed, and she wasn't alone. Cole, the technician who never wanted to be a whistleblower, stood with her. Alana, the DOJ lawyer who never flinched, cleared her path. General Randall Kane, once the man behind the mission, now a solemn witness, gave her the space to move forward without letting go of where she came from. Together, they dismantled a machine designed to silence. And then they built something better in its place, a watchdog infrastructure, legal precedent, a museum devoted to civilian ethics. But most critically, they reached a generation of cadets, engineers, and policymakers who now understand one hard truth: speed does not replace conscience. Automation is not absolution. Silence is not a strategy. At the National Center for Ethical Technology, Mera's flight vest rests behind glass. It is not displayed as a triumph, but as a challenge. Beneath it, etched in metal, a single question. What will you do when the system says fire and your gut says wait? Because somewhere another directive is being written, another scar is forming, and someone someday will have to stand. Will it be you?